Hi, Caleb with Brownells here, and in today's quick tip, we're going to be going over the top 3 ways to reduce recoil on your AR-15. Now, I know right out the gate, some of you are like, why the heck would you want to reduce recoil on a gun that already has almost no recoil? Alright, so first of all, the number one, obvious answer, especially if you're one of those guys that actually, trains with your AR-15 and stuff like that, is going to be faster follow-up shots, more accurately, on target, okay? There are plenty of other reasons out there. If you're one of those guys that's wondering, ask it in the comments. There's a ton of really knowledgeable dudes out there that will educate you further on that. We're not here for that. We're here for how, not necessarily so much the why, even though I touched on it a little bit. All right, so jumping right into it, the first way to reduce recoil on your AR-15 is the most obvious, and that's going to be a muzzle brake. Muzzle brakes are specifically designed to reduce recoil, reduce that muzzle movement, and things like that. And I'll just grab 2 really good examples here. And I don't have these installed on any of these 3 guns here because these 3 guns are suppressor hosts. A suppressor will reduce a ton of recoil on your AR-15 because of the gases that it redirects, and also just because of the weight. So they're super effective. But if you're not using a suppressor, don't have a suppressor, whatever the case may be, you can use muzzle brakes. And these are 2 of the best muzzle brakes, in my opinion, that aren't suppressor hosts that will mitigate recoil. This one's the Ultradyne right here, and then you also have the Precision Armament. Both do a phenomenal job at recoil reduction. Now the cons of a muzzle brake are just add to that blast concussion and just that overall noise profile of your AR-15. They are very loud. They make it a lot louder, whereas a suppressor does a great job at reducing recoil and does the opposite, makes it quieter. So that's something to consider, and that's probably the most effective. That's the one you're going to get the most out of. Out of all the 3 we're going to talk about, the muzzle device is going to have the greatest effect in terms of your 223, 5.56 AR-15. Now, whenever we get into our big bore calibers like your 450 Bushmaster and stuff like that, the muzzle device actually has less of an effect, and that's just because of the way muzzle brakes work. And we talked about how muzzle brakes actually work in a previous video, so go check that out for more detail on what actually happens in the muzzle brake and stuff like that. And if I remember, I'll link it in this one. Okay, so moving on from there, let's talk about the buffer system. So buffer weights and springs and stuff like that, those, you can play with those and definitely get some recoil reduction. And there's a lot of specialty buffer weights and fine-tuned springs and stuff you can do. And for the purpose of this video, I should have probably led with this, we're mainly talking about the fighting rifle here, right? Not so much your competition rifle, even though these are great for that as well. The reason I say that, because one we're about to talk about, I'll show it on this rifle, is the BCM Mark II recoil mitigation system, which is in all 3 of these guns here before you. And these 2 are AR-15s. This one's actually a BRN4, which is a 416 clone. But all of these still apply to that as well, so that's why it's here. Alright, so what this buffer is, it's what would be considered, even though it's the Bravo Company Mark II, it's an A5 length buffer, right? So it's that between carbine and rifle length. And the reason that these buffers even exist is for that recoil reduction, but also reliability increase, right? So this one actually does both. Typically when you start playing with your buffer spring and stuff like that, that's mainly for your competition guns, and you're going to notice a compromise in reliability over its service life, right? So they are more finicky with different types of ammunition, different conditions you're running them in and things like that, which is why service guns you always see the mil-spec buffer type stuff. You don't ever see people getting freaky with their springs and buffer weights for the most part. But the BCM Mark II is designed to be extremely reliable. I would argue more reliable than your mil-spec buffers, but it also helps smooth out that recoil impulse. So just to kind of talk about, people always say oh, the A5 length buffer is great for recoil and stuff like that. but no one ever really goes into why or how it works, why it does that. So if we pull it out here, all right, let's just whip it. This gun's filthy, my hands are dirty, just disregard. I use my guns. Okay, so this is the buffer itself. Notice that it is indeed shorter than a rifle length buffer, and we have a video talking about these types of buffers. If you watch the video we did with Mike from Sons of Liberty talking about the A5 length buffers, then that'll give you a lot of information. Also, we did have a dedicated product spotlight on the Voltor, the Bravo Company Mark II recoil mitigation system. Okay, so it is longer. This one is actually a T2, which is a little bit heavier than standard, right? But the buffers in here actually have a shock absorbing type feature, right? So there's a spring in here as well. And what that does is whenever your bolt is coming back into battery, that buffer slamming behind it has like a dead blow, more of like a dead blow type effect, if you will. And it reduces bolt bounce. So especially if you're shooting a machine gun, which a lot of you aren't, unfortunately, but you'll notice increased reliability with that. But whenever we talk about recoil reduction, it really comes down to the spring. So this is actually a rifle length spring that these A5 lengths use. And what that does, it gives you a longer area to actually compress or absorb that shock of that bolt coming back. And the actual like compression force between being fully relaxed and fully compressed is not as different as it is on a carbine spring. You have vastly different forces being applied there. And because of that, it has a recoil reducing effect, if you will. So one of the things that kind of calls that area of recoil, whenever your bolt comes back, it's pushing your buffer and spring back. That buffer slams into the back of the buffer tube and, of course, pushes the entire rifle backwards. So this is helping mitigate that. Now, let's move on to the third and number 3. Oh, also, I did mention the Voltor A5 and the BCM Mark II. All the parts between those are completely interchangeable for all intents and purposes. They're pretty much the same thing. Okay, so getting into the last thing here, and then we have a bonus one as well. There's a bonus upgrade, if you will. All right, so the last one is going to be an adjustable gas block. Now, whenever you hear adjustable gas block, you usually don't think fighting rifle or service rifle type setup, and you'd be absolutely right. So these two guns here, the BRN4 is kind of cheating because it bleeds off excess gas and it's a piston gun, but this gun here does not have an adjustable gas block. It is made to be extremely reliable, and because of that, I sacrifice a little bit of recoil reduction, probably not a ton, but with that being said, especially if you're running a suppressor, having an adjustable gas block is great. So this one here has a rifle speed gas system on it. So I can adjust that gas system really easy with or without a suppressor, right? And I'll just throw one on here. So I know my gas setting with a suppressor and without a suppressor works just fine. Now the whole theory behind this here is that if you were providing your firearm with just enough gas to lock the bolt to the rear, that's less force on your moving parts, which in turn is going to be less recoil for the same reasons we talked about as the buffer system. So there's something to consider there. And you may be thinking at this point, like, if I have a standard carbine buffer and an adjustable gas block, I'm going to notice the same exact thing as if I'm just running a standard gas block with an A5 length buffer or an adjustable gas block with an A5 length buffer. The adjustable gas block with the A5 length buffer would be the best of both worlds. You don't get the same performance, because remember when we talked about the recoil spring spreading out that force over the full length, you don't get that with the carbine spring. So you will still notice an improvement if you're using a A5 length buffer system with an adjustable gas block. So definitely do combine the two. It's not redundant. You're still going to get an increase, if you will. Okay. So adjustable gas blocks, A5 length buffer systems, or BCM Mark IIs, or muzzle brakes. Those are the top 3 things that will help reduce recoil on your AR-15. And I mentioned that there was a bonus one, and there is, because another thing to reduce recoil is just going to be weight. This thing is heavy with everything on the front of it, especially when I add that Lazarus 6 suppressor on here. It gets a little heavier. So weight, mass in itself, absorbs recoil energy, therefore reducing the recoil. So this gun pretty much does not move at all whenever I shoot it. Obviously, that is not an ideal upgrade in most situations, right? We don't always want heavy guns. For this type of gun right here, my more accurate AR build, I don't mind it. This gun right here, it's kind of hindering depending on what I'm doing. So if you can build a light gun and still build it with recoil reduction, you can certainly do that. A lot of your competition guns are built that way. But with that being said, they are not to a reliability standard that a good fighting rifle has. Okay, so with all that being said, if you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to add, obviously there are more things that can help you with this, but these are just the top 3. If you have any questions, need help, whatever, with anything ever for any reason, feel free to give us a call on the tech line. We'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.